Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the finals for the debate circle in Nairobi region. And gracing us today is Moi Forces Academy and Light Academy. And the motion for dissection reads, the Kenyan government should introduce carbon tax to encourage environmentally sustainable practices. I read the motion again. The Kenyan government should introduce carbon tax to encourage environmentally sustainable practices. All the best to both teams. In proposition, first speaker, you have 3 minutes.
Kenyan government should introduce carbon tax to encourage environmentally sustainable practices. I am Alfred Mutua from Moi Forces Academy, here to propose the motion. Now, the motion under this section requires us to understand 2 dimensions of it, the carbon tax dimension and the environmentally sustainable practice dimension. When we talk about carbon tax, we're talking about taxes that are levied on the rate of carbon emissions. And when we talk about environmentally sustainable practices, these are whatever things we do that will actually encourage us towards achieving an environment that is clean, that is eco-friendly, and etc., etc., etc. So now, what is the issue in the status quo that is actually leading us towards having this carbon tax? Because ladies and gentlemen, whenever these companies, whenever these people are actually using these fuels, there is no fee that is levied on them. So they don't actually consider about what am I doing to the environment, why there is no charge. Now, according to an article posted by Gilbert McCullough and David Weisberg on the design of carbon tax, we learn that carbon tax's main function is to internalize externalities associated with climate change. Now, my question is, how will we come about with this carbon tax, the framework? We will have clear and consistent pricing in such that there is a clear price per metric ton of the carbon. We will have gradual implementation so that we do not have these companies coming up with excuses that, oh, I don't know, we didn't have enough time, oh, you're doing this too fast on us. We will have revenue allocation, we will have monitoring and enforcement, where the government will establish robust monitoring techniques on these companies. And lastly, we will have public engagement and education, where each of these people, each of these companies, each of these households are told on the dangers of these carbon emissions, why the carbon tax is necessary, and how this carbon tax will lead to environmentally sustainable practices. But then one must wonder, what type of practices are these? 1, energy conservation, renewable energy system, water conservation, proper transportation, sustainable agriculture. All of these practices are what we actually need towards achieving a better environment. But this isn't a foreign thing. It's not like it's the first time that we're meeting this carbon tax policy. According to Statista.com, France introduced a carbon tax in 2014, and it charges $49 per metric ton. According to Statista.com, the carbon emissions have reduced from a significant 15% to 6.5% since the tax. You want another tax? You want another country, Canada, which levies a tax of $20 per metric ton. The carbon emissions from 27% to 12%, all courtesy of the Statista. Now, we are talking about how does it encourage these environmentally sustainable practices? According to a 2016 report titled Effective Carbon Rates, we have that it encourages it by creating financial incentive, encouraging innovations and development on new technologies, and helping to lower the emissions by helping these people convert from less environmentally sustainable practices to more, e.g. from coal to solar.
Team opposition, first speaker, you have 3 minutes.
I kind of like taxes. They give a nice kick to it. But Adrian Masakre from side opposition here to advance our case as to why we believe that though a carbon tax may be feasible in the short term, we still believe that it is not a way to encourage sustainable practices, even in the long term. All right, first and foremost, just to engage on something that the first speaker of proposition said, he mentioned that fuel has no charge and then comes to tell us 30 seconds later that somehow there are several countries that have implemented a carbon tax. Don't you understand the irony behind that statement? 2, talk about gradual implementation. But to my first point, implementing a carbon tax would have potential for carbon leakage. What do I mean by carbon leakage? It means basically businesses would jump ship, to put it lightly. So you implement a carbon tax in the bid to apparently promote sustainable practices. Businesses, in response to that, will move to areas that have weaker environmental regulations. And what does that look like? It comes to the principle of divergence, which inherently speaking basically means emissions reduction in one country will just offset increase in another country, which means you're not solving the problem of carbon emissions, or you're not solving the problem of issues of climate change. What you're doing is you're just jumping ship, moving from here, transferring the problem to there. It doesn't really solve the problem that we have. Yeah? And at a point of that where global sustainability requires international cooperation, it kind of diminishes the impact that the Kenyan carbon tax will have, not only to its society, but also at a broader perspective of the world, because by shifting to another country, what we're doing is, okay, Kenya has reduced its carbon emission, for example. Uganda will not have reduced its carbon emission. Tanzania will not have reduced its carbon emission. What are we doing? A bunch of zero work. On to my second point. A burden on low household incomes, which it disproportionately affects low household incomes in this capacity, due to the fact that low household incomes spend a lot of money on energy and fuel, which means higher energy costs. Look at this. The average household every year buys 8.86 pounds of coal, 2.5 gallons of oil, and 246 cubic feet of natural gas. Yeah? In 2020, 166.4 was the price of petrol per liter. 3 years later, 179.3 per liter. And somehow you want to implement a carbon tax which will just make this price go higher. The solution, ladies and gentlemen, as well as the panel, is not to implement a carbon tax. On our side of the bench, we'll give you 3 things. Not just 3, but more than 3, but 3 main ones. 1, they talk about raising awareness. Yes, we should raise awareness. But raising awareness is not just by increasing the price of carbon emissions. 2, promoting recycling and waste reduction. You don't promote it by increasing the price, you promote it by educating people, ladies and gentlemen. So kindly, as I conclude, let us get educated and join side opposition. I rest my case.
Team Proposition, second speaker, you have 3 minutes.
The Kenyan government should introduce carbon tax to encourage environmentally sustainable practices. As far as that, let me breathe. Carbon emissions. Now, on to redraft some of the rhetorical questions that have been said here, but I actually have answers to, which is more ironical than I actually think, or you think, is that this person comes and mentions about carbon leakage, immediately after tells us about international corporations. Isn't that a contradiction to you? 2, he talks about a low household income. As we said, we have given you a framework in which this will work, or for any other implementation that requires a framework, we have provided it for you, and this framework will generate revenue in order to fund that household. Are we good? And as a man of facts, all your scientists, commonly known as the Jesus behind the podium, I would like to incentivize carbon tax. Carbon tax is an incentive that is set to control the carbon emissions. If you're told today that you're suffering from cancer, and I give you the solution of chemotherapy, what you'll actually do is that you'll adhere to it, right? It's the only way you can survive. Just the same way I'm giving them carbon tax, but they don't want to listen. On to my first point, environmental impact. Sensational. From the bench of statistics itself, I sat next to him, or where he formerly sat, to compose the statistic. According to the Kenya Industrial Development and Research Institution, published on the 7th of March 2023, Mark Ngecho tells us that industrial carbon emissions have amounted to 16 million metric tons in 2020. How are the useless solutions going to help you? 16 million metric tons. Emphasis as type of repetition. Now, what are the effects of this? 1,
Climate change to global warming. What do I mean by climate change? The following: the loss of biodiversity, 2, cancer, 3, droughts, and of course, reduced agricultural products. Now, allow me to provide you the statistics that are currently on the ground. They are saying potential. It's not that we don't know. They are currently here with us. Let me tell you. According to Statista, published on the November 2021, 7.9 million Kenyans lack sufficient food for consumption just because of that carbon emission. Revenue generated will help you for any other factor that's going to be mentioned by this team behind the podium. Requires funding. We have given you the household. We have given you how it's going to work. They come and contradict themselves. I think this case is closed. And that's why I said pi r squared. We have given you the area of the debate circle motion. And they are part of our arc length. Signing out is Hamza Hussein from one of the most renowned military national schools in this nation, the Moi Forces Academy.
Second speaker, team opposition, you have 3 minutes.
Who allows carbon emitting vehicles into the country? Do we have options to carbon emitting vehicles? It can be difficult to measure external costs and how much tax should actually be. You spoke of 1 metric ton of carbon. How can we actually determine that 1 metric ton of carbon has been produced? Which devices can we use to determine that actually 1 metric ton of carbon has been produced? I will touch on administration costs in measuring pollution and collecting tax. According to the Economics Help Organization, the government will have to employ people to help enforce the tax. Yet countries like Kenya are facing other pressing challenges, such as hunger, poor infrastructure, and poor infrastructure. Instead of introducing carbon tax, I would like to propose that we should go electric. Yes, we should go electric instead to solve this problem of carbon emissions in the first place. Because does the solution lie in introducing carbon tax or actually preventing them in the first place? Is the solution to introduce carbon tax to curb carbon emissions or to prevent these carbon emissions in the first place? Food for thought. Why should we go electric? According to the European Parliament, as per the 22nd March 2019, transport was responsible for about a quarter of the European Union's carbon emissions, of which 17.7% came from road transport. Please digest that. 17% of carbon emissions came from road transport, meaning that this is a problem. The first speaker came and spoke about incentivizing monetary techniques to help in the implementation of carbon tax. What are these monetary techniques that you're speaking about? Could you please give us an example so that we're not left in darkness? And as I'm about to conclude, I'll ask this again. Which is better, prevention or cure? I'm sure we all know that prevention is better than cure. That's why we should prevent these carbon emissions from taking place in the first place than to just simply introduce some tax to curb them. Let's go electric to prevent these carbon emissions from taking place. I conclude my speech. Thank you for your time.
Team proposition have been asked to give a comparison of the advantages and disadvantages of imposing a carbon tax, and team opposition have been asked to give a financial framework for going electric. Team proposition, third speaker, you have 3 minutes.
We found the area of this debate Now let's find the volume of its effect. My name is Ronnie Kiven from Moi Forces Academy, and I'm here to propose the motion that states the Kenyan government should introduce carbon tax to encourage environmentally sustainable practices. Now, I'm going to address their points. First of all, the second speaker comes and talks to us about the the cars that consume fuel and how we go electric. Now, we have people owning Toyotas, Mercedes, BMW. How are you going to make these people who own these prestigious cars to go electric? Simple. Carbon tax. Carbon tax creates this pinch for these individuals so that they can adapt better methods, so that they can adapt environmentally sustainable practices, e.g. switching from fuel consumption to electric. Now, they also mentioned that they are going to fix and adopt environmental sustainable practices by creating awareness and promoting recycling. This is not 1990. We're in 2022. We've tried this. It has been tried, tested, failed. Have you not heard about the 16 million metric tons we are emitting? And it's not like we haven't tried creating awareness. How many times have you seen in our geography textbooks? How many times have you seen campaigns, even at the village level, where people are talked about the effects of this climate change, but still there is no impact? How will we generate this impact, this pinch we're talking about? What will make these people to actually feel the need for environmental sustainable practices? And the need will be brought about by this carbon tax, which forces people to adopt these environmental sustainable practices. Now, I'm going to rush to the question that was asked, which is, what is the comparison between the advantages and disadvantages of carbon emissions? And this is simple. There is just disadvantages, because we have darkness on the effects of carbon emission on climate change up until now, and I just flipped the switch. So what carbon emissions do is they destroy the ozone layer. When they destroy the ozone layer, they increase global warming. When they increase global warming, it leads to climate change. Some of this climate change comes in the form of prolonged drought, frequent floods, unpredictable weather. And that is why we have food insecurity. This is through prolonged droughts, unpredictable weather patterns. And this food insecurity is not just food insecurity. This is a big issue. As you can see, according to Relief Web International, from July to September 2022, 3.5 million people in Kenya are facing high levels of acute food insecurity. 3.5 million. Food insecurity, just because of this climate change. And therefore, we do know that it is necessary to implement these environmentally sustainable practices. And they've also talked about the impact that carbon tax will have on these low households. But if you heard our framework well, we proposed that the revenue we obtain from carbon tax, because the rate of carbon tax will be depending on the rate of emission, and we have bigger industries producing more carbon, and therefore they'll be charged higher, and this revenue can be channeled towards these low-income households so that they can adopt the environmentally sustainable practices with the help of funding. Thank you.
Team opposition, third speaker, you have 3 minutes.
First and foremost, to answer the question, how do we go electric given the issues that are fund related? Now, if you're going electric, we are going electric, not the government. We believe that the government's role should be in encouraging the use of electric cars by investing in charging networks and other things that will benefit the use of electric cars. Electric cars, on your next purchase, I implore you to go and purchase an electric car or a gas-powered car, as long as it has a lower carbon emission. To begin, the climate crisis is not just an environmental issue, it is a moral issue. It is our moral obligation to protect the planet and ensure a sustainable future for all. That's the Pope. Notice how I used the word moral. It is a moral obligation, not a political obligation. Now, we enter the realm of politics the moment we enter the matter of carbon tax. Ladies and gentlemen, given our current standings on all matters tax, I feel that the first solution should not be running to legislation and imposing carbon tax. Rather, it should be all of us joining hands and finding solutions to this together. My name is Joseph Otochi, representing Light Academy, and strongly opposing the motion that states that the Kenyan government should introduce carbon tax to encourage environmentally sustainable practices. To this we say, away with carbon tax. Ironically, we agree with most of the things that the proposers have said. They've spoken about so many things that impact the environment related to carbon emissions. And to this debate, the argument is carbon tax or no carbon tax. And to that we say no carbon tax. Now, the first thing that we need to do is say, if not carbon tax, then what? Now, I'll just proceed and continue with some of the points that my fellow opposers have said, beginning with the electric cars. In our worst case scenario, according to the European Energy Agency, they found that even with electric emissions, this is in charging the cars, this electricity, the emissions are actually 17 to 30% lower than actually driving a petrol-powered car. So we say electric is the way. As well, according to the International Journal of Green Energy, investing in synthetic fuels that lower carbon emissions to near zero levels in comparison will allow us to have an effect, a positive effect on this carbon emissions. So for the car lovers out there, it's not a must that we switch over to electric. We just need to switch to synthetic fuels in order to combat these issues related to carbon emissions. As well, imposing a carbon tax on the people would be a negative effect on our attitude towards fighting climate change. We cannot fight climate change if we feel that it is a responsibility, a task that we need to endure. Ladies and gentlemen, if we join hands in fighting climate change rather than having taxes imposed on us, I feel that it would be of a greater benefit and we'll be able to overall net impact our society better, especially us as the younger community in our generation. Thank you.
We'll be taking closing remarks. Team Proposition, you have 1 minute to give your closing remark.
I want you to get the picture of how big a metric ton is. As you look at me here, I'm 5'6". 1 metric ton is approximately 32 feet, a 32-feet spear. Now, in all of the statistics that both the opposer and the proposers have said, we are talking about 416 million metric tons. We are talking about 700 million metric tons. We are talking about such big numbers. So this is not a lightweight joke. No, it's something serious. Now, there's been a lot of irony in this. They've agreed with us, we've agreed with them. But then it comes down to what is actually happening. All of the practices that they've said, we totally agree with. And they've mentioned on the sustainable practices. They've talked about electric cars. We'll give you one better. They should switch to solar. They should switch to maybe natural gas. They should switch to all of these things. But then what? Haven't we tried this? Because, ladies and gentlemen, without these people being pinched, they'll go back. They'll go back and do the same thing. Now, this carbon tax helps from the home level where the taxes generated are taken back to those people back that are poor, and they can be used to change to these methods, as well as these industries, because they will have incentive not to go back to emissions.
Team Opposition, you have 1 minute to give your closing remark.
Now, my job isn't to side with side proposition. My job is to prove to you why our side makes more sense in general. Yeah. When it comes to the dimensions of anything tax, and in this case, a carbon tax, who gets affected? What is the effect? Is this the best way, or do we have other alternatives? And how is it measured? Now, side proposition come and tell us that 1 metric ton is apparently so huge, talking about the 5'6" and the 32-foot spear. Quite dazzling as it is. If, let's say, by sheer chance, I implement this policy, or I implement this tax, how will I measure it? They don't tell me. Will it affect more people than do benefit? They don't tell me. Will it promote sustainable practices? They don't tell me. So it begs me wondering, why on earth should I go mad and try to implement a carbon tax? Yeah. I would rather survive when it comes to urgency and necessity than thrive when I'm broke due to a carbon tax on top of the many taxes. We have shown you the other benefits that come with not implementing a carbon tax: awareness, recycling, energy conservation, sustainable agriculture, policy change, collaboration, just to name a few. Hence, my stance on not implementing a carbon tax. Thank you very much.
From what was coming out from especially the last speakers, you seemed to agree. And actually, I expected that you will reach that consensus. Why? Because this is a motion of carrots and sticks. On one side, you're talking of the environment, but then on the other side, you're talking of a tax. So there's a need for an incentive in terms of what? Maybe tax rebates for those who are doing better. That was not coming out very well. You're talking of the carbon tax as an incentive. I thought the carbon tax more as a stick. You know, like I think the last speaker talked about you feel some pinch, use the word pinch. That was good. So the economic versus the environmental, and that's why there was some source of consensus. Yes, we agree with you, which is what actually we expected. So let's just say, may the most outstanding team carry the day.
The Kenyan government should introduce carbon tax to encourage environmentally sustainable practices. What both teams did not bring out clearly are these environmentally sustainable practices. That bit was not well captured. However, the bit of carbon tax, its implementation or lack of it was fairly well brought out. All the best.